Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Greater Naples. We are a welcoming congregation, freely seeking intellectual and spiritual growth. We strive to create a larger community of peace, justice, and love. That is our mission vision statement. And my name is Reverend Jennifer Dant. I am not the minister here. Reverend Tony Fisher's not with us this week, but this is my home congregation. For those of you who might be visiting, this congregation grew me into the minister I am today, and I will forever be grateful. So it's an honor to lead worship with you today. Please take a moment to put any electronics into worship mode. And I understand we have one announcement today. John?
Thank you for a few moments of your time. My name is John Betcher. I've been a member for 10 years and recently was appointed co-chairman of the Gardens and Grounds Committee, along with Jane Ellsworth. How many, by raising a hand, have noticed the new landscaping in front of the building? Everybody who's noticed it. Okay, now the rest of you do notice it. It's really the result of the wonderful creativeness and sweat equity of Kathy Rippon, who is a professional landscaper. So she did a professional drawing. The garden committee approved it. And with our sweat equity, not this last Tuesday, but the Tuesday before and Wednesday and Thursday, several members of the group worked hard with Kathy, who also worked hard with her assistant, Israel, to not only rip out and clean all the old plants, put in new plants, and adjust the sprinkler system. Because of budget restrictions, the board could not be as generous as it wanted to be, I'm sure, in funding the garden, which is now a separate committee, taking the weight off of Glenn Looney, our facility manager, who was previously in charge of both the grounds and the building. And this is our first effort to really enhance the memorial garden and all the gardens around the building. I wonder if they're here, could I ask these people to stand, because they were here and did hard work. Kathy Rippon, I think she's in OWL training. So she's the one who told us she could do this. And since we didn't have it in our budget, we decided to just go ahead while she's still here. She had to leave in 2 weeks. So we got it all done under her leadership, and we thank Kathy Rippon. How about George Evans? George, can you hear me? Stand up. Well, stay standing, please. No, I'd like to try to get him up. Okay. Hold your applause until we have all of them. There's Harleen Richardson. Where is she? Harleen, stand up. Stand up. No, hold your applause so at the end. Jan Jurgens, I think she's in OWL training. Jane Ellsworth, I think, has to be out of town, but she is co-chairman and was integral to the success of this project. Joe Gellings? No. They do come to work on the garden. Patrick Parker? No. John Graydon? Parker. Oh, there he is. John Graydon, Rick Gazzaro, and his friend Gary also helped a great deal. Bob Massey, there he is. And Bill McCormick, our president, came out. So now, okay. Thank you all. Because this was outside budget, we requested donations, and the garden club members themselves kicked in nearly enough to cover the cost. But if you are interested in continuing garden enhancements, we have our own separate account now where we can deposit donations and withdraw them to buy plants, mulch, fertilizer, etc. I would like to mention we have 4 major donors. I'd like to mention just one who happens not to be here, so I don't think he'll be embarrassed. Bill McCormick, our president, made the largest financial donation. So in his absence, Thank you very much. And thank you all. Take a look at the garden if you didn't before you leave.
From the place where we are right, flowers will never grow. Flowers will never grow in the spring. The place where we are right is hard and trampled like a yard. But doubts and loves dig up the world like a mole, like a plow. And a whisper will be heard in the place where the ruined house once stood. Good friends, I invite you to worship this morning. Our first song is hymn number 59. I'm sorry. Make sure everybody's paying attention. Stand as you are willing or able in body or spirit. One of the first times I sang that hymn, I found myself absolutely in tears and looked over to a new member who had kids who were my age, and it was Erica, and I don't know if you remember that, and we were all verklempt. And 2 of our children are graduating on Friday, and I think they were toddlers then, so it is good to be home. Good to be home with all of you. Thank you. Our chalice lighting this morning, the words are in the order of the service, if you will please join me. We drink from wells we did not dig. We have been warmed by fires we did not build. We light this chalice in thanksgiving for those who passed their lives to us. So may it be. We'll move into the time for joys and sorrows, a time when we share what makes our heart sing and share what makes our heart break, knowing that joys shared are doubled and sorrows shared are halved. I'll bring a microphone around if anyone has anything. So for all those joys and sorrows spoken and unspoken, may we hold one another in our hearts this week. Another hymn, number 119. Once to every soul and nation. Again, rise in body, spirit, as you are willing and able. I invite you to sit back, take a breath, put your feet on the floor, let the week's cares and worries wash away, drop off, or hold them a little more lightly. Spirit of life and love, let us keep in our hearts all those who have sacrificed their lives defending our country. Let us remember the high cost that we pay in human life, in human spirit, wherever there is violence. Let us work for a day when it will no longer be necessary to have war. Give us the strength to forgive. Forgive the mistakes that were made, to forgive the enemies both within and outside. And never let us forget those who went before us, those who allow us to be here today. Let us enter a moment of silence. As you take a moment to get out your hymnals for the responsive reading, I want to take a moment to thank Bill and Susie for being here. It's great for me because if nothing else I say today resonates with you, you have the gift of their music to take with you this week. Thank you. Responsive reading number 720. We remember them. This is one that is a Unitarian Universalist, is by an author, a UU author, but is used widely in the community, especially the hospice community, as well as by Michael Harper at Naples Community Hospital. It's a well-accepted reading out in the community. In the rising of the sun and in its going down, we remember them. In the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we remember them. In the opening of buds and in the rebirth of spring, we remember them. In the blueness of the sky and in the warmth of the summer, we remember them. In the rustling of leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we remember them. In the beginning of the year and when it ends, we remember them. When we are weary and in need of strength, we remember them. When we have joys we yearn to share, we remember them. So long as we live, they too shall live, for they are now our rest, as we remember them. Amen. So as we do remembering today and recalling and honoring those who have come before us, who have died in wars, I ask that you give generously to this congregation, where is a place where we can come to sort of wrestle with the questions and how we feel about war, peace, all those human conditions. I invite the ushers down. We will now receive the morning offering. For all that is given and all that is received, we are truly grateful. Thank you. A gift. Just when you seem to yourself nothing but a flimsy web of questions, you are given the questions of others to hold in the emptiness of your hands. Songbird eggs that can still hatch if you keep them warm. Butterflies opening and closing themselves in your cup palms, trusting you not to injure their scintillant fur or their dust. You are given the question of others as if they are answers to all you ask. Yes, perhaps this gift is your answer. Change is the cost of memory. We face the death of our mentors before we can untangle all the flawed lessons, as if truth in our hands will ever be more real. Looking out how to hold on to victories over losses. Failing that, just holding on as much slips by. Trying to reach out instead of looking back. Two weeks ago, a colleague of mine struggled with writing a sermon for Mother's Day. He's like, I'm male, I'm not a parent. What do I have to say? What he meant was that he had no authority to speak on a topic on which he had no direct experience. And now I find myself in the same boat. I've never served in the military. My family's military stories are quite distant. What do I have to say about Memorial Day? I remember more than one Memorial Day in this very sanctuary listening to some of you share stories about your active duty, summoning forth the names of those who sacrificed their lives. Indeed, what do I have to say about Memorial Day? Last month, on a Delta flight out of Baltimore, waiting to return to South Florida, some upbeat instrumental music thumped over the intercom. It was like a club. Push, push, push. I was over the right wing on the side where the luggage comes out, and a flight attendant came by and peered through the window. We were waiting for the color guard to pick up a soldier's body to return to his family, and he walked away. What? My travel companion and I looked at each other, realizing that there was a casket carrying a soldier's remains beneath us. The music stopped. We are waiting for the military to pick up the remains of a World War II veteran who has died, they said over the intercom. They have gotten tied up at security. We do not anticipate any problems making connections in Atlanta. Everyone stopped talking. No babies cried, no electronics. The plane was absolutely silent and stayed silent for about 10 full minutes. Below began a heavy clunking as the ground crew prepared the coffin to be received. A hearse backed up towards the plane while soldiers approached in formation surrounding the gray box, now visible on that luggage belt below us. They covered the casket with the American flag and lifted the box shoulder high and bowed their heads in unison. That box was so steady it did not move. Carefully, they walked the casket to the hearse and placed it respectfully, lovingly inside. My tears were silent, and the strength of my emotions surprised me. And the PA crackled for a moment. Thank you for your observation. We'll now prepare for takeoff. And only then did people start talking again. Sharing that organic, silent, communal moment, recognizing a stranger's service, tells me that indeed I might have something to say about Memorial Day. And Memorial Day was previously called Decoration Day, becoming a government-recognized holiday back in 1868. Years before, celebrations of sacred grieving following the Civil War in states like Georgia, New York, Illinois, and Mississippi were already happening. Families and communities cleaned up grave sites, left mementos, flowers, and often included ground dinners, which are picnics. They had these in the cemetery in order to remember and celebrate the lives of the fallen soldiers from both the North and the South. Originally, it was always May 30th, and it was a rotating holiday. It wasn't until 1971 that Congress chose the last Monday in May in order to create a long weekend. There was an actual bill that took a number of those government holidays and changed them in order to create long holiday weekends, rather than specific singular dates, like our religious holidays that rotate every year. This may account for why this holiday weekend marks the beginning of summer, great sales, and at least up north, it's now okay to wear white. Instead of widespread remembering and mourning those who sacrificed their lives in the role of serving their country, our country, my country. Recently, a potential presidential candidate made a statement about Memorial Day, saying, honoring those men and women, but mostly men, who made the ultimate sacrifice. What I think he meant was that more men than women have died in service. However, female deaths make up 2% of the lives lost in both Afghanistan and Iraq. But it was still a stupid thing to say. But it did prompt me to think more deeply about service, sacrifice, and my lack of opinion about it. I don't have a solid dualistic way of thinking about war or peace. I can't say that I think war is a good idea or that it's an evil necessity sometimes. But I do believe that most wars seem manipulated by both sides in power. Self-interest seems to be the motivation for getting involved, and the service folks a necessary commodity. I can't stand up here and say that nonviolence is always the way. If someone was harming a loved one or me, I could easily commit violence to protect them, to protect myself. Another reason that politicians' comment was so thoughtless is that it missed the fact that when an individual serves, a family serves. And I can think of no other greater ultimate sacrifice as a parent than one of my children. But it's a privilege. It's a privilege that I can go through my day and not pay attention to news of wars and skirmishes, potential areas we might get involved in. And there are people in my life who would chastise me with intense rhetoric about the sacrifices others have made so I can have that privilege. And they do that with enough passion for a country song about red, white, and blue putting boots in other countries' you-know-whats. But if I answer that with my own clever cliche, saying, I love my country, but I think we should see other people, I'm accused of being unpatriotic. But I'm aware that as wonderful and willing as our soldiers are, I cannot ignore that there are daughters, sons, mothers, families on the other side, and countless civilians caught in the middle. 8 weeks after my son Jack was born, my journal entry from March 25th, 2003 reads, "We are at war, and somewhere is an Iraqi woman who gave birth to a son the same day I did. What must her life be like?" When we remain polarized in the places where we are so sure that we are right, no flowers may grow. The hard and trampled places within us are unable to yield new life. Memorial Day is important because it gives us space to remember. It creates opportunities of reflection, space to breathe, space to consider. On Memorial Day, we're required not to have answers, but to recall the lives lost in service and wonder about the questions. How we remember, where we remember, are things to be considered. Early burial grounds were in churchyards. Being buried close to God's house literally meant having a better chance of getting into heaven. Over time, population increased, burial spaces became scarce, a lot of disease, and the Civil War happened. So many young soldiers' remains were never returned. What did that mean for their souls? How could families be assured that their loved ones ended up in their rightful place in eternity? The Universalist Church of America was a fairly large denomination prior to the Civil War, but it began to decline after the Civil War in part because other Protestant denominations began to take a softer, more inclusive look or take on salvation in the wake of so many absent bodies. And cemeteries around that time became our first public parks, no longer private rural burial plots or churchyard cemeteries in the city. They were designed with sprawling lawns, huge stone memorials, winding paths and roads, and magnificent gates. These spaces were not built for the dead as much as they were built for the living who remain. Keith Egner, Associate Professor of American Art and Architecture at the University of Missouri, recently released a photographic book documenting the evolution of burying our dead. He says, "The idea being that you leave behind the mercantile world outside the gates and enter into the space where you can meditate, where you can come into contact with spirituality and concentrate. What really fascinates me is the idea about liminal spaces, liminality, the joining together of two different very states. You have kind of an intensification of knowledge and emotion. The transcendentalists were fascinated by cemeteries, and I'm fascinated by the same things. The coming together of these disparate states of life and death, nature and culture. Cemeteries are the places that those kinds of meetings of the past and the future come to the fore." The Sarasota National Cemetery's Patriot Plaza is a space like that, very conducive to memory. What struck me most when I visited was the artwork based on personal narratives rather than patriotic rhetoric. The images and text crossed generations. Another section called Witness to Mission asks us to reflect on a collection of photographs of soldiers in everyday service throughout history. Their website says, or explains, that this approach to the installation allows comparisons, poses questions, and tells stories. It is striking to perceive the huge changes since 1860, but even more, to understand how many aspects of the military experience are remarkably similar. Spaces like these are created to encourage us not only to offer our gratitude to those we remember, but to reflect upon our commitments to those that come next. We face the death of our mentors before we can untangle all the flawed lessons. So I could spend tomorrow frantically making a 10 a.m. parade and stand with my hand over my heart as the flag passes by, and then take off to numerous Memorial Day sales, getting great discounts on stuff I don't need. I might sleep in, make a picnic lunch for my family, and spend a wonderfully unscheduled 24 hours. Either of those choices is fine. Yet it speaks to that place of privilege that as a working, white, heterosexual female of a certain age in this country, I can choose to remember those who ultimately died in service to our country, or I can carry on as if it is simply another day. 20th century Unitarian theologian James Luther Adams claims that religious liberalism depends on the principle that revelation is continuous. You've heard that before. Revelation is not sealed. Our religious tradition is a living tradition because we are always learning. We are always learning new truths. He also said we deny the Immaculate Conception of virtue and affirm the necessity of social incarnation, meaning good things don't just happen, people make them happen. Work, learn, and work. The learning asks how we remember our military folks who have died in battle. Do we make of them flawless martyrs? Or do we think about the fleeting and frailness of a single human story in a sea of lost lives? Do we seek out the lessons of those served and ask them to tell us what they want us to know? Or do we listen to the narratives told by big-name politicians and big money, vested in keeping us numb and terrorized? Is it enough to simply remember and offer gratitude without recognizing our power to make the change in the name of those who offered their lives? Can we be silent on a plane full of strangers watching the casket of an unknown veteran gently placed in a hearse and not let it change us? This is the work. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "It's not enough to say we must not wage war. It is necessary to love peace and sacrifice for it." Jesuit priest and peace activist Daniel Berrigan puts it this way: "Of course, let us have peace," we cry, "but at the same time, let us have normalcy. Let us lose nothing. Let our lives stand intact. Let us know neither prison nor ill repute nor disruption of ties." There is no peace because there are no peacemakers. There are no makers of peace because the making of peace is at least as costly as the making of war, at least as disruptive, at least as liable to bring disgrace and prison and death in its wake. But this sermon isn't about activism. It's not even a call to wage peace. It is a call to deepen our memory. This morning's reading, A Gift by Denise Levertov, claims other people's questions to us are a way to deeper understanding about our own lives. It is also a way of remembering and honoring those who have come before. And on Memorial Day, what better way to honor those lost in battle than to hold the songbird eggs of their questions in our hands? We need our doubts, our fears, our uncertainty to dig up the world like a mole, a plow, like from our reading. Even our children, our RE children here, understand through our gardening program how important space and air is for healthy soil and good produce. Memorial Day gives us the space and the air to dig around a little, to remember the questions of dead soldiers, to consider what we are willing to sacrifice for the generation that comes after us. How are we willing to use our looking back to inform our reaching forward? Apathy and avoidance of participating in any meaningful Memorial Day undertaking might just be a symptom of my dualistic thinking. Some may say you only have two choices: militantly pro-democracy, patriotic, you are with us or against us, or peace is the only way, which can be equally destructive. Consider the story of a congregation, another part of the country, where a peace activist, a member of the congregation, approached an active service member, also a member of the congregation, after service and said to him, "You are an instrument of death and destruction." That is an example of how when we stay in the positions of being right, no flowers can grow. But neither is doing nothing creating peace. Denial and apathy are not nonviolence and do little to honor the dead who ask to speak to us from beyond the grave every Memorial Day. Exercising my privilege of not remembering in order to avoid discomfort, uncertainty, and doubt is not being the best human being that I can be. Ours is a long history of being able to cherish our doubts and, aware of all that ambiguity, be engaged in the task of doing the work of creating a more just and equitable world. We recognize that the human capacity for goodness must be cultivated. It is the task of human nurture. It is the task of humanity to nurture the seeds of divinity within each one of us. And that does not require that we be sure or right about anything. It is work that is done through relationship, through the covenants of being together, where we work to overcome the fear, the anxiety, the greed, and insecurities of our more animal nature. Those who pay the ultimate price in the wars of this country knew what they were willing to sacrifice. Let us make sure their sacrifices were not in vain. The challenge for each one of us is to consider what to give of ourselves. What will we risk in order to be the change we wish to cultivate? Imagine a Memorial Day without any new names to be remembered. May we recognize the privileged place where we sit upon the deaths and sacrifices of those who came before us. May we remember them honestly and with open hearts, aware of our doubts and willing to embrace the uneasiness. May we always remember that we would not, should not, and will not do this work of remembering alone. May it be so. I invite you into our final hymn, number 168, One More Step. For those who came before us, may our gratitude be long and lasting. For those who come after us, may we be the strong stewards of our commitments. May each of us know the immortality of the larger frame revealed through community. And may we always remember that its transformational power rests in our actions. I invite you to be seated for the postlude. Dear friends, leave in peace this afternoon, return in love, take some time to remember. Have a wonderful week.